Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Okay, breathe. Please, anybody. Please.
I want to show you something. Now, is this patriot enough?
More than a week ago, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited India, the first top official of the Biden administration to do so. Do you remember what newspaper headlines said the next day? They said Austin raised human rights issues with Indian leaders. The statement showed how America assumed it was in a position to preach the world. It also showed how some in the press put the US on a pedestal when it comes to human rights. We say tonight, all sides should be watching this show to know where the US stands on human rights. 10 months back, a white policeman took away the right to life from a black man, choked him to death. A few days back, an Asian American war veteran had to bare his chest to show battle scars and ask if this was good enough proof of patriotism. Crimes against Asian Americans have shot up by nearly 150% in the last 1 year. The US, which sits in judgment of the world, is clearly and consistently failing to safeguard the rights of its own people. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you stories and data to show how the George Floyd murder trial is in fact a test of the US system. It is America that is on trial. Also on the show, India backs the US stand calling for a UN-brokered peace process in Afghanistan. No meeting between foreign ministers of India and Pakistan. We'll take you to Dushanbe for the Heart of Asia summit. What is Donald Trump up to? Last we checked, he crashed a wedding, took the mic and toasted himself. His question to the world, do you miss me yet? Islamist attacks in Mozambique have intensified. Beheaded bodies are strewn in the streets. ISIS terrorists control the gas-rich town of Palma. We'll bring you a ground report. And a pair of shoes with human blood in the soles have kicked off a controversy and a lawsuit. Why do such outrageous products sell? We'll discuss that, but we begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The city of Berlin has suspended vaccinations with the AstraZeneca jab for those under 60, amid reports of further cases of blood clots among people who had received the shot. Canada has also paused the vaccine use for those under 55 and sought new risk analysis. A survey of 77 epidemiologists and virologists from 28 countries by People's Vaccine Alliance has revealed that the world has less than a year before new vaccines are needed to fight the coronavirus. The top decision-making body of the Chinese parliament unanimously approved a plan to change Hong Kong's electoral system. The contentious changes, among others, give power to the pro-Beijing Electoral Committee of Hong Kong to vet all candidates for the Legislative Council. Nepal has ordered schools to close for 4 days after air pollution climbed to hazardous levels, forcing millions of students to stay home across the country. Ahead of the Quad Navy drills, France is deploying its carrier battle group to the region to participate in two major exercises. The French Navy's assault helicopter carrier Tonnerre and escort frigate Surcouf have arrived at the Kochi port. A New York woman has accused Governor Andrew Cuomo of grabbing her face and kissing her cheek at her home during a visit to inspect local flood damage, becoming the latest woman to come forward with charges of inappropriate behavior against the embattled governor. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro on Monday unveiled the biggest cabinet reshuffle since he took power in January 2019. 6 ministers have been replaced, including the Foreign Affairs and Defense Minister. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister has slammed South Korean President Moon Jae-in over criticism of the North's recent missile test. Kim Yo-jong has called Moon Jae-in a parrot raised by America. Argentine striker Sergio Aguero will leave Manchester City at the end of the season after being told his contract will not be renewed. The 32-year-old is City's record goal scorer with 257 goals in 387 games since joining from Atletico Madrid in 2011. Injuries and illnesses have relegated Aguero to a peripheral role this season, but the club have announced that they will honor his legacy with a statue outside the Etihad Stadium. Aguero has won 4 Premier League titles, an FA Cup and 5 League Cups with City so far. Russell Westbrook created NBA history with his 16th triple-double of the season as the Washington Wizards overcame the Indiana Pacers 132-124. The 9-time All-Star scored 35 points, made a season-high 21 assists and claimed 14 rebounds. This is the first triple-double ever in the NBA to feature 35 points and 20-plus assists. He has also broken the Wizards franchise record for most triple-doubles in just 38 games this season.
"10 months ago, a death in America led to worldwide outrage. 46-year-old George Floyd died in police custody. A police officer knelt on his neck for close to 10 minutes. The death of George Floyd led to the birth of a movement. Some images went viral. These CCTV cameras and police body cams captured the events leading up to Floyd's death. The fatal arrest was a clear case of excessive use of police force. It also highlighted a pattern of systemic racism in the US. Racial profiling, excessive violence, police brutality. The virus of racism is also a pandemic, and America remains in denial. It sees the problem in others. And I'll tell you why I say this. The US State Department is set to release a report on human rights. Washington will sit in judgment of nearly 200 countries and their human rights record. But what about America's own human rights record? 10 months after the killing of George Floyd, the virus of racism is alive and thriving in the US. It is targeting not just African Americans, but even Asian Americans. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you how the US, the self-appointed champion of human rights, has failed to secure the most basic rights of its own people. First, a quick recap. Yesterday, the officer accused of the murder of George Floyd went on trial. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin faces 3 charges: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. On the 25th of May last year, he was the cop who arrested George Floyd. Floyd had allegedly tried passing a counterfeit $20 bill at a grocery store. This policeman, Chauvin, was among a group of 4 cops responding to the police call. They found Floyd inside a car across the grocery store. First, the police officers pulled him out. Floyd was handcuffed, forced to face down on the street. And when the policeman pressed his knee on Floyd's neck, that stomach-churning moment was captured by bystanders. Yesterday, the jury was shown that very same video.
I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I can't breathe shit.
Bro, get up, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get up, get in the car.
I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole car. Get up, get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
You gave y'all the opportunity to get in, bro. I told you can't win.
My knee.
You can't win, man.
I'm through.
I know you in there, but you didn't listen.
I'm talking for me. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. There's some water or something. Please. Please. I can't breathe all the time. Shut up.
I can't breathe. Those words led to a global campaign against racism. The United States saw violent protests across 50 states, and since then, the country has witnessed a change of guard, a new president, a new government, but racism in America has only gotten worse. In recent weeks and months, Asian Americans have come under attack. Consider these numbers. Hate crimes against Asian Americans surged almost 150%. An advocacy group received more than 2,800 reports of hate crimes, and in all of these incidents, Asian Americans were the target. This month, 3 day spas in Georgia were attacked. 8 people died in the shooting. 6 of the victims were women of Asian descent. It is quite evident this attacker was also motivated by race. After African Americans last year, Asian Americans took to the streets this month, and they too are demanding equal rights in the US. And amid this raging debate, one lawmaker decided to make a statement. This is Lee Wong, an elected official in Ohio. At the meeting of the trustees in Westchester Township, Wong decided to make a statement against the rising hate. He is a war veteran. He got up, took off his shirt to reveal the scars of a war he endured for the US.
For too long, I have put up with a lot of in silence. Excuse me the language. Too afraid to speak out, fearing more abuse and discrimination. There are some ignorant people that will come up to me and say that I don't look American or patriotic enough. Now that really gets my goat. People question my patriotism, that I don't look American enough, they could not get over this face. I want to show you something. I want to tell you, because I'm not afraid. I'm 69 years old, and I'm going to show you what patriotism, the questions about patriotism looks like. Here is my proof. This is sustained from my service in the US military. Now, is this patriot enough? I'm not ashamed to walk around anymore.
Lee Wong moved from China to the United States more than 50 years ago. He spent 2 decades in the army. He serves his community as a trustee. And even after serving Americans all of these years, he has to prove his loyalty to the US. He has to prove that he's American. The divide became deeper after the insurrection of the US Capitol across the society. Here's yet another example. Violence broke out near the Oregon State Capitol building. 2 groups on opposite ends of the political spectrum came face to face. The images that you're seeing are of the US. One was the far-right group called Proud Boys. The second was the far-left anti-fascists or Antifa. They clashed. One of them tried to run his car into a protester. The police looked helpless. African Americans are demanding justice for police brutality. Asian Americans are being targeted in hate crimes. Political opponents are engaged in violent clashes. This is the America that human rights reports hardly talk about. And before we begin our next story, I want to read out some names for you. Rayshard Brooks, Daniel Prude, Breonna Taylor, Atatiana Jefferson, Aura Rosser, Stephen Clark, Botham Jean, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray. Who are these people? These are individuals killed by the American police in the last 7 years. There are many more in this list, many more black Americans who were either shot or tasered, brutally mauled or asphyxiated, what they call choked to death. But none of these killings were enough to shake the collective conscience of the American society or the American judicial system for that matter. It took a convergence of forces for America to wake up. A pandemic, an election year, the highest rate of unemployment, and to top it all, the killing of George Floyd in broad daylight with every city under lockdown, Americans could not look away this time. They were forced to pay attention. George Floyd's killing became a rallying point for racial justice in the United States. As the trial in the case officially begins now, America is on the edge once again. Every American, irrespective of their color or background, is watching the developments closely. Because this is far more than the trial of one police officer in the death of one black American. This is a test of the American society and of the American judicial system. If they fail this test, the implications will be national, perhaps even global.
America is on trial.
Make no mistake about it. Shaving is in the courtroom, but America's on trial.
Do you swear or affirm that you will be attentive during this trial?
The judicial system is on test.
This is a test for America, American justice, I believe, because people are beyond fed up, beyond.
Derek Chauvin, the officer accused in the murder of George Floyd, has been finally put on trial. The case is significant because it is quite uncommon for U.S. police officers to be penalized for using lethal force.
I can't breathe. Please, the name of it. I can't breathe shit.
The court proceedings have begun. The opening remarks have been made. The arguments from both sides reveal just how divided America has become as a society.
That Derek Chauvin did exactly what he had been trained to do over the course of his 19-year career. The use of force is not attractive, but it is a necessary component of policing.
You will learn that he was well aware that Mr. Floyd was unarmed, that Mr. Floyd had not threatened anyone, that Mr. Floyd was in handcuffs, he was completely in the control of the police, he was defenseless.
The evidence will show that Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl.
He did not die from an opioid overdose. Why? Because you'll be able to look at the video footage and you see he looks absolutely nothing like a person who would die from an opioid overdose.
This is the most high-profile case since the 1991 beating of Rodney King Jr. The trial ended with partial justice being delivered. All efforts have been made to ensure that this one does not end in a mistrial. A total of 12 people are sitting on the jury, with 3 alternates. 9 of them are white Americans, 4 of them are black Americans, and 2 jurors are multiracial.
And you never saw the officers get up.
And like the fish in a bag.
The diversity of the jury is aimed at installing a sense of legitimacy in the judicial process.
Their ages range from their 20s to their 60s, and they include a chemist, an auditor, a social worker, a registered nurse who works with COVID-19 patients, and a grandmother who does volunteer work. The one thing that they all do have in common, though, is that they all said they could put aside their prior opinions and make a decision based on the evidence in the case that's going to be presented at trial.
Outside the court, sentiments are running high. Americans from all backgrounds have assembled near the Minneapolis courthouse. They say the verdict will serve as justice for all of America.
And I can tell you right now that opioids did not kill George Floyd. Derek Chauvin did.
This is a trial for justice for George Floyd, but the results are going to be affected everywhere.
I'm honestly just trying to take in as much of the case as I can without getting overwhelmed, because my mental health is deteriorating, unfortunately, as a black woman in the United States. So I'm just trying to protect myself as well.
Give me an M!
1,100 miles away from the heart of the action, in Washington, D.C., all the developments are being monitored. The White House says U.S. President Joe Biden will be following the trial closely.
Well, he certainly will be watching closely, as Americans across the country will be watching. At the time of George Floyd's death, he talked about this as being an event that really opened up a wound in the American public, and it really brought to light for a lot of people in this country just the kind of racial injustice and inequality that many communities are experiencing every single day.
That it was just a medical issue.
It's a moment of reckoning for the American society. A chance for the American justice system to prove it can actually work. Because for decades, it has failed black Americans who have suffered due to police brutality. The trial of Derek Chauvin is an opportunity for this system to redeem itself. The outcome is anything but certain, and the stakes for the entire country are enormous. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
The United States recently slapped sanctions on Chinese officials. Do you know why? For quote-unquote serious human rights abuses targeting Uyghurs. The US also imposed sanctions on Cuba's Interior Minister. What for? Serious human rights violations. On the 10th of December 2020, the US announced sanctions against firms and individuals in Haiti, in Yemen, and in Russia. Again, what for? Serious human rights violations. Here is the document. Let's rewind now, 7 months before the release of this statement, this document. In the very same United States, a man's most basic right, the right to life, was snatched away from him. Officers knelt on his neck and choked him to death. George Floyd was one of the 4 people of color to be killed by American cops in 2020. Between 2013 and 2019, 42 of every 1 million African Americans were killed in police shooting. Where was the American Human Rights Police then? And what exactly was the Treasury Department doing? Perhaps schooling other countries on human rights. You see, Washington wants to champion this cause, which is fine, but it has failed to protect the rights of its own people, which is not fine. America dishes out sanctions abroad, and at home it turns a blind eye to human rights violations. In 2019, 65% of Americans said it was common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views. The question we want to discuss on Gravitas tonight is why? Why does racism continue to fester in the US? For starters, America has a history of systemic racism, a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, where one treating people of color as inferior or the lesser lot was normalized and totally legal. Today, slavery has been outlawed. It's been outlawed for over 150 years since the 13th Amendment Act was passed, but in practice, the legacy of racism continues to shadow the life of every black American. In the year 2018, 88% of the people stopped by the police in New York City were black or Latin American, and 70% of them were innocent. This is according to the New York Civil Liberties Union. Racism in the United States exacerbated post 9/11. Prejudice was now laced with Islamophobia. Muslims were vilified, so were Sikhs, Arabs, and people of South Asian descent. They were all called names: Taliban, terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Let me read out from the website of the U.S. Department of Justice. It says, the attorney's offices have investigated 800 incidents involving violence, threats, vandalism, and arson against Arab Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, South Asian Americans, and those perceived to be of Middle Eastern origin, all post 9/11. In 2009, Barack Obama entered the White House with a promise to end racism. What happened then? You see, for years, American leaders have leveraged racism. They've peddled the issue of race to garner support from white Americans. In the 1960s, Richard Nixon stirred up the fear of black empowerment. In 2016, it was Donald Trump fanning the flames of racism once again, fueling white supremacy. Donald Trump may be gone, but Trumpism stays. In fact, it's become worse. What happened to Muslims post 9/11 also happened to Asian Americans since the Wuhan virus outbreak. Hate crimes against them increased nearly 150%. Nearly 3,800 hate crimes were recorded between March 2020 and March 2021. 68% of these were against women. The pandemic killed people of color at higher rates. exposed America's health disparity. It was in the middle of the very same pandemic that George Floyd was killed. The murder exposed America's us versus them divide. It also triggered the largest mass demonstration in the US in American history. It drew 9% of the country to the streets, this protest. But what has changed? Cut to November, and Donald Trump increased his votes. His supporters targeted Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from George Floyd's home state of Minnesota. Send her back, they chanted. The question is, send her back where? From George Floyd to Rayshard Brooks to Daniel Prude, they were or are just as American. Their identity is not dependent on the color of their skin. How long before Americans realize this? Here's something Kamala Harris said recently. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in the US, and always has been. Do you know why? It's high time authorities did something about it. Instead of preaching others, perhaps look at their own record. The US cannot be hoisting the flag of liberty with its knee on the neck of a black man. It cannot be celebrating the American dream by choking the dreams of minorities. Slavery was a Southern evil. Racism is pan-American. Let me show you some more figures. As of 2019, 78% of blacks believe that America has not gone far enough in giving blacks equal rights with the whites. 50% believe blacks will never likely have equal rights. 84% believe the legacy of slavery affects the position of black people in American society. 71% think race relations in the US are generally bad. Washington must acknowledge these fault lines first, when later tonight it sits. As we speak, the US is evaluating the status of almost 200 countries in human rights. It is set to release the report on human rights practices, and we say, look inwards first. Charity, as they say, begins at home. For now, we'll take you to Tajikistan. It played host to the Heart of Asia Summit this year. The conference was supposed to be about the peace efforts in Afghanistan, but the world's attention was on the foreign ministers of India and Pakistan. There was intense speculation in the run-up to the summit. Many were hoping for a meeting between the two leaders. There was the possibility of a pull-aside too, but in the end, all the hype turned out to be for nothing. Our next report tells you why.
Leaders express warmth for their allies in different ways. Before the pandemic, it was the good old handshake, or even the occasional hug. These days, they prefer the elbow bump. But when it comes to India and Pakistan, it's just a bumpy encounter with awkwardness written all over the setting. When India's S. Jaishankar and Pakistan's Shah Mahmood Qureshi gathered for a group picture at the Heart of Asia Summit, they did everything to avoid an encounter.
No interaction. There was no interaction between Indian External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Earlier in the day as well, we saw Indian External Affairs Minister walking by the Pakistani Foreign Minister, not shaking hands, not interacting with him, and standing at his place. That was between the Azeri Foreign Minister, and right next to him was the Pakistani Foreign Minister.
Inside the hall, though, the Indian External Affairs Minister looked far more comfortable when delivering a statement. He backed a political solution for peace and supported the US proposal for a United Nations-led peace process in Afghanistan.
For a durable peace in Afghanistan, what we need is a genuine double peace. That is peace within Afghanistan and peace around Afghanistan. It requires harmonizing the interests of all, both within and around that country.
The idea for a UN-backed process was first suggested by US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in a letter he had sent to Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani. The letter also advocated for India's involvement in the peace process. Blinken wants the UN to convene a meeting of foreign ministers from Russia, China, Pakistan, India and Iran. But a date for the meeting is yet to be finalized. Another meeting that hasn't happened yet is between New Delhi and Islamabad. The Dushanbe summit was being billed as a possible venue for a new dialogue between Jaishankar and Qureshi. It didn't happen. Instead, the Indian External Affairs Minister engaged with key stakeholders of the Afghanistan peace dialogue. This included Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, and Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. With India's participation at the Heart of Asia Summit, it looks like New Delhi finally has a formal seat at the table for the peace negotiations. All that remains to be done is to fill the chasm between a peace deal on paper and peace on the ground. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now here's a story that does not get the kind of attention it deserves. The impact of the pandemic on shopping. It has been profound, to say the least. The restrictions and safety concerns drove a lot of us to embrace e-commerce. Now, as most of the world emerges from lockdowns, the way we shop is also changing. Look around yourself. Most people consciously avoid paying through cash now. They're making the most of technology and paying digitally through apps. The Russians are trying to do away with the apps too. They've come up with the technology where you can pay just with a glance. How does that happen? Wait till you watch our next report.
This customer is not taking a selfie. He is paying for his coffee. Welcome to Cafe Prime in Moscow. You don't really have to hand over cash or cards here. Or for that matter, scan those cryptic QR codes. All you've got to do is stare at the camera and grab what you like. This is the future of shopping. A new facial recognition payment system that has been launched in multiple supermarkets and cafes in Moscow. But it works only after you download the required app and enter your biometric information. The uptake of this technology is promising. In Cafe Prime, more so, because you get a 20% discount every time you use the method.
This is a new technology. This is very interesting. Plus, there is a discount 20% for paying via facial recognition.
It is not necessary to take the credit card. I often forget the credit card at home. So in my opinion, paying via the Face ID is much better.
The X5 Group, Russia's leading food retailer, was the first to come up with this technology. Earlier this month, it joined forces with Russia's state giant Sberbank to roll out this technology in 52 of its supermarkets, inspiring smaller stores to do the same.
There are currently more than 5,500 self-checkouts equipped with the facial recognition module. We are planning a rollout throughout the entire country in the near future.
But how does the technology really work? Facial recognition is a biometric technology used to identify an individual from a facial image. The technique makes it possible to authenticate one's identity, to check if an individual is who he or she claims to be. A person's face is compared to an existing image in a database, which in return helps to identify the individual. Every little detail is taken into consideration. The base of the ears, the distance between the two pupils, the shape of the nose, eyebrows and mouth, even the skin grain. Hair and clothes are not taken into account. Originally, this method was used to fight crime. Now it is being used to access bank accounts and social media platforms. But with rising popularity, there are also growing security and privacy concerns. Here's why. Number 1. In countries without personal freedoms, where governments have no limits to the use of technology, facial recognition could be used to spy upon the citizens. 2. Ultimately, facial recognition data gets stored in servers. And as with any other computer system, it is vulnerable to hackers who can use the data to commit identity fraud. And 3. There is a lack of regulation. There is no consistent legal framework for its use and limits. Nobody knows what businesses adopting facial recognition are doing with your data. that is not to say that facial recognition technology is all about the cons. It has its advantages too. A 20% discount on your coffee is not the least of those advantages. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Since we've been discussing the United States tonight, how could we not talk about the former US President, Donald Trump? How is he? Where is he? What is he up to? Well, he seems to be doing just fine. On Saturday, Mr. Trump gate-crashed a wedding at his Florida resort, Mar-a-Lago. And he was dressed to impress, a tuxedo, a bow tie, and a whole lot of sass. He addressed the attendees too. How could he not? He started off with China. Watch this.
They're telling me about China. They're telling me about Iran. How are we doing with Iran? How do you like that? Well, they were ready to make it. You know, they would have done anything. They would have done anything. And this guy goes and drops the sanctions. And then he says, we'd like to negotiate. Now, we're not dealing with the United States. They don't want to deal with us. And China, the same thing. They never treated us that way, right? You saw what happened a few days ago. It was terrible. And the border's not good. The border is the worst anybody's ever seen it. And what you see now, multiply it times 10, Jim. You would know how to handle. He's the only one I know that might handle the border tougher than me.
You heard that. Jim would have handled the border tougher than me. Well, there's no clarity which Jim the former president was referring to, but one thing was absolutely clear, that Donald Trump was not there to toast the couple that was getting married. He was there just to vent his personal grievances, toast himself, as some in the press said. Social media platforms, have blocked him. There are no rallies to attend now. So he had to settle for a wedding. Take another look, we say.
And the topic is in the most humanitarian way, because that's what it is. What's happening to the kids, they're living in squalor. They are living like nobody has ever seen anybody. There's never been anything like what's happening. And you're going to have hundreds, and you have it now. They have the airplane photos, the shops, and they call them shops. And these things are showing thousands and thousands of people coming up from South America. And it's going to be, it's just, look, it's a disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster from their standpoint, and it's going to destroy the country.
It's going to destroy the country. It sounds a bit rich coming from Donald Trump, but he seems to have a point. The crisis at America's southern border is indeed getting worse. There's a massive surge of asylum-seeking migrants. The border facilities have been overwhelmed for a while, and Joe Biden, the current president, is in a fix. He's caught between the promise to establish a more humane immigration system and political pressure to send a tougher message and deter migrants from entering America. There is no such pressure on Donald Trump, though, not anymore. So he's making the most of his time, playing golf and gate-crashing weddings to send out his message. Trump's team is trying to save him the bother, though. They've launched an official website for him, 45office.com. Donald Trump supporters can share their thoughts here, submit their letters, make personalized greetings, and schedule requests to meet the former president. It's a wise move, we say, not only because it will provide Donald Trump a new platform to speak his mind, but also because the shift in the news cycle is getting rather mundane without Captain Chaos. Now to the biggest developing story in Africa. From the southern African country of Mozambique, it is witnessing deadly violence and Islamist attacks. The target is a town called Palma, which has some of the world's biggest gas reserves. European energy companies have major investments here. But now groups linked to the Islamic State are running riot. Beheaded bodies are strewn on the streets. Thousands have been displaced. Our next report tells you why this attack poses a direct threat to the very future of Mozambique. These are fighters of the Islamic State, the men who are believed to be behind the deadly attack in Palma. An alarming escalation that has left more than 55 people dead and thousands missing. The assault by the Islamic State on Palma is the most serious and deadly attack of this insurgency that began 4 years ago. Reports say beheaded bodies filled up the streets of the northern town. The attack itself happened in the gas-rich province of Cabo Delgado. This is where insurgents with ties to ISIS have killed at least 2,000 people in the last 3 years. Rights groups say the recent attack was a well-coordinated one and the violence could spread beyond the borders of Mozambique.
It was vicious and the shootings were indiscriminate on the streets, including attacks on local banks as well as local hotels, but also generally in the houses. And this has caused massive chaos and displacement because people were just fleeing in all directions, running for their lives into the bushes, those that could. Others were trapped in hotels, as you are aware.
The terrorists now claim they control Palma's banks, government offices, factories and army barracks. The bigger worry is the control of a gas hub. Palma is at the center of a multi-billion-dollar investment by Total, the French oil and gas refining giant. Gas deposits here are said to be among the world's largest. A report says Total and others have poured in $20 billion to extract liquefied natural gas from here. The attack threatens the economic future of Mozambique. Last week, United Nations officials had said the violence could displace up to 1 million people by June.
What has happened in Palma is an absolute horror being inflicted on civilians by a non-state armed group. That is what I can say. They have done horrific things. They are still doing so. We have reports this morning of continued sporadic clashes. That is why we are talking about our expectations of thousands of more people moving out from Palma district and towards other areas of the country and towards the border with Tanzania.
Portugal is now stepping in to help Mozambique. In the first half of April, it will dispatch 60 Special Forces troops. The Portuguese soldiers will train the local soldiers. Mozambique will fight to regain control of the lost territories, but a battle for Palma will drastically worsen the humanitarian crisis on the ground. Bureau Report, WION, World is One. Why is Portugal stepping in? Because Mozambique used to be a Portuguese colony until it gained independence. And this is a developing story. We'll keep getting you the very latest right here on Gravitas on what's happening in Mozambique. Let's turn to another country that we've been tracking very closely, Myanmar. Monday was the bloodiest day since the military coup in Myanmar. More than 100 protesters were killed by the army. From cities like Mandalay and Yangon, the focus has shifted to the borders now. This is where Myanmar's powerful ethnic rebels reside, and many of them have started mobilizing against the military regime. Myanmar may well be descending into a civil war now. Here's a report on how things could play out.
Myanmar is churning in the vicious cycle of conflict. A military coup, a bloody crackdown, and now the growing murmurs of a civil war. 135 distinct ethnic groups live in Myanmar. It's a union forged in the heat of insurgency. Many of these groups have waged guerrilla wars with the army, chief among them the Karen National Union. They control the state of Karen, tucked away in Myanmar's southeast. Over the weekend, military jets swooped into Karen, dropping their payload on these villages. 3 people were killed. From prominent urban centers, the anti-coup crusade is expanding to the jungles and the border villages. The bastions of Myanmar's ethnic rebels, 2 parallel stories are unfolding here. The villagers are scampering to find shelter. Some have sought refuge in a cave, the natural rock face shielding them from the army's air raids. Others have fled to neighboring Thailand. Humanitarian groups say Thai forces are turning away the refugees, a claim the Prime Minister, a coup leader himself, denies.
We have discussed with those who entered Thailand. We asked them if they have any problem in their area. When they said no problem, we just asked them to return to their land first. We asked. We did not use any force.
Both the coup leaders and the parallel government are wooing the ethnic groups. Their army made the first move. They removed the Rakhine Arakan army from the terror list, then invited major ethnic groups for talks. Both moves have backfired. The Arakan army are backing the protesters. They are threatening war if the crackdown continues. The Karen National Union has declined to meet the coup leaders. They want a national unity government before engaging. Back in the cities, the army clampdown continues. Undaunted by global condemnation, on Monday at least 114 protesters were killed, including several children. The odds are stacked against the protesters. Their slingshots and fireworks against barricade-piercing grenades and guns. It's an unfair battle. Over a dozen chiefs of defense from Europe and North America condemned the army's actions. A professional military follows international standards for conduct and is responsible for protecting, not harming, the people it serves. But the coup leaders are not listening. They were busy overseeing a parade in the capital. The ethnic rebels could turn the tide in Myanmar's summer of discontent. They have the military and the political clout. Where global sanctions and world leaders failed, these domestic groups may succeed. But at what cost? Can a civil war reverse a military coup? Can a ragtag band of insurgents preserve national unity? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Now here's a story that may give some of you goosebumps. Also those of you who are eating right now, this is your cue to stop eating. Because what our next report shows you is bloody, quite literally. Imagine wearing a shoe made of human blood. Well, you can buy one such pair for more than $1,000. Who made these outrageous shoes? And where can you buy them? Who is buying them? Our next report has all the details. This shoe has got people's blood boiling. Its soles have human blood. It has the name of the devil. The company behind it is called Mischief. But the sneakers look like Nike. Shoe fanatics will realize the pair is a customized version of Nike Air Max 97s with a sole full of human blood. Does it have any takers? Only 666 pairs were made with blood and hellish themes. They were priced at $1,018 each. The sneakers are in collaboration with rapper Lil Nas X. Their release coincides with his new single Montero, Call Me By Your Name. In its music video, the 22-year-old rapper falls into hell. This is what happens next. This is Lil Nas giving the devil a lap dance. The video is outrageous. The shoes, all the more. You'll be surprised the pairs are all sold out. Ever wondered why such products even sell? Who buys them? In 2014, a town in Canada's Newfoundland tried to sell parts of a dead whale. A 12-meter-long sperm whale had floated ashore when the town enrolled the remains on eBay. Do you know what happened next? Before the town could find a buyer, high tides took the whale away. A New Mexico woman once tried selling her soul. Bids for it touched $405 in a day. What happened next? The selling platform intervened. Laurie is not alone. This man had listed himself online for nearly $28,000 after his office gave him a 20-day notice. He apparently got buyers. There are also takers for chupacabra. Wondering what it is? It's a mythical blood-drinking creature. You can find a whole host of listings online. They're supposedly 100% real. Well, we'll end with one question. What is wrong with people? Bureau Report, WION, World is One. I can tell you Nike has sued the company behind the Satan shoes for trademark infringement. It says the shoes were produced without Nike's approval or authorization. But do you approve? Would you buy shoes like these? Write to us. We're wrapping the show, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.